Personal problems. In a man always lives his dual nature. Changing the masks of his behavior, we often do not track the boundaries of the distribution of roles that we play every day. I have always been characteristic of this, which not infrequently led me to ridiculous situations. All the streams of my consciousness are directed only to seem, but not to be. Getting acquainted with a girl, I am completely transformed into a macho, which requires a lot of attention to himself. Often, maybe because of his naivety, the girl all this is perceived as at face value. Here recently met on the dating site with one person, so on the phone I was the tenderness, ready to take her to the ends of the earth, only if she was only good. But coming to the girl and talking to her on different topics, she came to the conclusion, and where was my role, which was played on the phone? Well, it still came to sex, to which I actually and aspired to pleasing her ears. Pretending the other half of my consciousness, which I sometimes hardly agree with, convincing that I am exactly like that, but things diverge from thoughts. I naively believed that pretending I will achieve the best result, but all efforts only lead to disappointment. I loved her a lot, but nowadays the passion died in me. I'm still with her, it's been 20 years almost, and the worst thing is that I don't love her anymore. But I still stayed with her, and I live every day a new role. She is cool, smart, well-read, and when we first met, I did not dote on her. She is older than me, and experience in family life she has much more. As a friend of 10 years was married, as she says it was her mistake. From marriage she has a son who is now quite grown up and independent. His father left him the apartment of his parents, who left this world. I was thrown through life, in search of crazy adventures, which not once led me to painful consequences, and always a friend stood on the guard of my interests, protecting me, which I often did not appreciate, limited to only praise for her deeds. No, I do not want to say that I am so bad, and she is an angel of pure soul. She also has many shortcomings. Sometimes looking back, I realize that the feelings of the past cannot return, and time cannot turn back, no matter how I try. And from this go becomes sad at heart, that the breath of my love dried up, dissolved in the wreckage of my consciousness. No, she did not become different. It is I became different, completely different. Look at some things. Days filled with emptiness fly by with the speed of a passing train, and I do not know how to stop them. Engaged in self-destruction, I put on mask after mask, remaining inside faceless, indifferently perceiving what is happening. She left me more than once, but still came back, or I persistently brought her back because I loved her, as it seemed to me at the time. But it turned out to be just another mask, which I put on my nature, organizing a masquerade. If you think that in bed she is nothing of herself and she is a log, then you are mistaken. She is still that thing. Over time, she has not changed in any way outwardly, the same taut, still the same pretty and energetic lady, on which sometimes throw glances men when we walk together on the street, and I can see it. I would say this MILF in juice, that not everyone would miss with his attention. But she got tired of me. I cooled down to her, so to speak. My fire of the flame of love died out. You will say, why then I do not get rid of her? I took and decided everything, put the dots above, and the question itself would be resolved, and do not need to build a mask, playing out of himself suffering. No, I cannot do that. Maybe still, somewhere in the depths of my soul I still have feelings, but they are so deep that do not get out of the secret of my consciousness. There is only one pity for her, although I jealous more than myself probably. We became different, we have different interests, and sometimes we have different lives. The friend has her own apartment, as well as me, and sometimes she is absent for weeks, only call often, or rather she calls, and she calls every day, probably loves, but I do not care, for me at least would not call. And when she does come, I need sex. I do not schlindayu on different their women. I'm afraid to kiss something to myself. Then suffer. Money for medikartstva spend. I am so the old-fashioned way, twitched the shutter and satisfied, but it certainly does not replace never alive woman. It is 100%. I already, after 2 hours, I want her to leave the location of my apartment, but I have to tolerate her presence, which I am not very happy. Even if you say everything as it is, that her presence here, I am not welcome and all my masks are dropped. It does not convince her, but on the contrary, on my head immediately fall curses, which, of course, I am very hurt, and I come into a rage, with a scandal throwing her out of her apartment. Having thrown her out, I have on my soul as if the cat's scribut, and it's not that I repented, but that I acted as the last scoundrel, because she loves me so much, and I betrayed with her our love. It is not explained to her that the feelings are gone and nothing to change, though beat your forehead against the wall. In an attempt to change something, I stopped sometimes answering her calls, which does not prevent her to call my mother and ask why I do not pick up the phone on her call, totally out of her mind. What about Mom? I do not understand. I sometimes do not even remember about it, if the friend does not call, or herself is not at my house. Because she has the keys to my door, I gave her myself duplicates, of which I am sorry. Many times I took the keys from her. Well, each time Rajastaval on his weakness. I sometimes seem to be like a rag view of myself. Another would be in my place once and for all would stop these games, but I do not care about myself. How many times I convinced myself that it's time to change the state of things. At the thought that we parted, I was in a good mood, and I was sure that it will be without a doubt. But my weakness did not allow me to be persistent in their intentions. Every time I dreamed of getting rid of her, thought about a plan of action, but every time it all happened the same thing, I was afraid to tell her to her face, leaving only hints of our divorce, although we are not married and we have children, and no. Maybe the absence of children and became the turning point in our relationship, because children can bring their parents together, forming a picture of a family idyll, which in any case strengthens the bonds of a woman and a man. I more often began to look at other women in the hope that in the future, getting rid of her friend, I can get acquainted with one of them. And while my conscience does not tell me to do it, so I was brought up. Yes, I am not sinless, and I cheated on her once, which later confessed and then regretted, but otherwise I did not know how to act. I was eating it, because then I loved her very much and could not forgive myself for a long time for this. But that was then, and now everything is different. I do not hold any obligations, and I have already met twice with girls, and I am not sad that I did so, because I warned my friend that we would be better if we would go our own way. Do she really like this kind of life? I do not understand. It is what to be that she was treated like this, and I am already really angry at her. Sometimes I am rude to her, openly tell her friend about her shortcomings, without any censorship, not shy in expressions, sometimes bordering on the edge of foul. But this is her problem. I do not impose it on myself, and I her offenses on the side. If she does not understand otherwise, let her blame herself. No, I certainly respect the way she is, as she has no other way. Let her blame herself. No, I certainly respect her as a friend, and she is not a bad person, always ready to help, to come to degenerate other people, but it does not play a big role here. Personal relationships do not relate to this. There are all different. Self-sacrifice for the sake of love will never replace the simple relationship between people. Although I see her sacrifice, the other, after what I taught her, would have said goodbye long ago, but not her. This leads me to think that she is a masochist. No matter how I do not hurt her, except for the physical, of course, she will tolerate it to the last despite the humiliation, and this all depresses me. All I have to do for now is to accept the fact that this situation will not change, and the masks of my faces will constantly change in countless quantities, plunging me into despair and despondency. The end!